Thank you for joining us with Family Basics 101. I'm Dr. Bruce McClure, the local minister at the Prince George's Church of Christ, located at 7800 Central Avenue in Landover, Maryland. This week, we will continue the series we began on last week because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So this week, we will continue discussing domestic violence, but throughout the week, we will focus on intervention. Today and tomorrow, we will talk about police intervention and the judicial system and its role in intervention. But I want you to just kind of be aware that current law passed back in 1998 amends paragraph C of subdivision 4 of section 140.10 of the criminal procedure law to effect major changes in how police handle domestic incidents. In addition, the law prohibits police officers from threatening an arrest for the purpose of discouraging police intervention in domestic violence situations. Specifically, it says that an officer is not required to arrest every family member or every household member who may have been involved in a misdemeanor family offense, and it stipulates the criteria that the officer must consider when attempting to identify and to arrest the primary aggressor. Specifically, when attempting to identify the primary aggressor and deciding if an arrest is appropriate, an officer must consider the comparative extent of injuries, whether any threat was made, whether any person has a prior history of domestic abuse, and whether the person acted defensively. It provides that an officer is not required to make an arrest when the officer reasonably believes that a person, their conduct was justified under Article 35 of the Penal Code Defense of Justice. Now, what does that translate into that is easily understood? And I've got a slide that I want to show you as we wrap up Family Basics 101 for today. There are 5 things police basically are trained to do on a domestic violence or domestic dispute call. First and foremost, best practice is to dispatch 2 officers in order to keep the abuser and the victim away from the presence of each other. You separate them. You get them away from the presence of each other. And that's best done if there are at least 2 officers dispatched to the scene. That could be 2 different patrol cars. If they're partner rides, it's best if the 2 patrol cars, if possible, the 2 partners, let's say it's a double ride car, they take one person and the other car takes the other people and they separate them. And sometimes that alone helps to de-escalate what's going on. Secondly, on the domestic calls, the police must determine if firearms are on premise. 79% of domestic violence cases involved finding and confiscating firearms. It's very important for police to raise that question. Not were firearms involved in this incident per se, but are there firearms on premise? Well, why is that important? Because a little bit later, when we talk about assessment, what if an assessment is done that, okay, nobody's going to be arrested, nobody's going to be asked to leave, But when the police leave the scene, the firearms are still there. So after determining if firearms are on the premise, not whether or not specifically firearms were used in that domestic call, then there's a requirement, or should be, collecting of evidence, interviewing the abuser and the victim, interviewing neighbors, interviewing witnesses, because many times what you will find, this is not the first call. Many times the neighbors would have recognized some indicators that something is not right in that home. Witnesses, if they are asked what's going on or what do you think is going on, sometimes they will tell you. Now, it's important that the police who are dispatched are trained properly, because many times the people that could really help with the matter are the neighbors and the witnesses. But if that becomes a hostile situation where the police are basically intimidated by the neighbors who are just there watching, if they are intimidated by the neighbors or the people watching, then there are no witnesses, because those are the people from which the witness pool is taken. Next, there must be the conducting of a risk assessment to determine the level of danger for the victim and if a safety plan should be put into place. Safety plans involves making sure shelter information is available, emergency escape plan is in place, an emergency phone number is accessible, emergency money is accessible to the person as well. So all of this, honestly, should be addressed by the on scene officers who are called. Now, the challenge is, are the officers trained to handle domestic calls? Uh, if they are not properly trained, then they do not know about the safety assessment. Uh, if they are interviewing or talking separately to the victim, questions should be asked. Now, look, do you feel safe staying in this home? Or if you leave this home tonight, if we determine that you need to leave or we need to arrest the abuser, do you have resources? Do you have somewhere where to go? Is there someone you can call? Uh, do you have a place where you can store emergency, like an emergency go pack that has cosmetics or toiletries or change of garment? Uh, do you have emergency money that you could walk a block from this house and you could call an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi cab? Uh, do you have money for an overnight stay at a hotel? Uh, all of that is involved, or should be, in making sure that the individual is safe if they have to escape or leave the premise. Uh, and then one of the things that police are trained to do, or should be, are mandatory arrest under certain circumstances, such as clear evidence of an assault, violation of a protective order, physical evidence showing that an assault was made or attempted. We say, well, how can they recognize that? Look for thrown items. Look to see if there are items that are strewn all over the place. Are there broken items? Are there holes in the wall? Uh, Notice the police are trained, or should be trained, to notice, to assess the entire environment other than just somebody got punched out, other than just somebody got thrown into a wall, because there are other indicators that an assault took place without physically assaulting the person. Uh, the thrown items, those are messages that they would throw the person, they would hit the person, they would do damage to the individual, equally as so as damage was done to those items. Those are five things that police are trained to do on domestic violence calls. Uh, and keep in mind that for the most part, all of these things are taking place almost simultaneously. Uh, and there's a lot going on in a short amount of time. There's tension from the abused, there's tension from the victim. The police, when they come on the call, they're trained to maintain a neutral presence, but at the same time, the adrenaline is rushing because they don't know, the police do not know what to expect. One of the most difficult calls for police officers are these domestic disputes. And we talked about that last week because the same person who was victimized and made the call to the police will somehow, sometimes change and start defending the abuser once the police show up on the scene. Are you going to arrest him? Are you going to arrest her? Uh, or if the police have to restrain the individual, why are you putting him in handcuffs? Why are you taking her away from the children? So the police are put in a very, very sometimes untenable position. And if people who are observing the call can witness that, and yet at the same time, if the police who are responding the call are trained properly, say something is not right in this situation. Somebody has to be willing to shatter the silence, the secrecy, and say, hopefully, to trained professionals, in this situation, this family, this individual needs help. The number at the in the last box, 1-800-799-7233, 1-800-799-7233, is a universal number. It's good in every state in the United States. Write that number down, even if you're not presently feeling threatened, but you are in somewhat of a volatile, unstable situation. Keep that number with you at all times. If you are just a family friend, a church member, write the number down because you never ever know when somebody will turn to you for help. And rather than just saying, well, just call 911 and get the police out here, say, yes, you can call 911, but here's another number that you might want to call also. Come back tomorrow and we will continue, because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We will continue sharing more information and hopefully more ways to keep families safe. I'll see you back in class again tomorrow. Don't be late and don't skip class.